Go on a trip to Atlanta, Georgia. One of the places that we visited was the Georgia Aquarium, and they taught us, we went and saw the dolphin show, and they repeatedly announced over and over again. You can just leave that slide for a second, Gary. I'm going off script. Sorry. It's always confusing when I do that. But they told us over and over again that the first 5 or 6 rows were the splash zone, and if you sat in those rows, you will get wet. And they did. Like, the dolphins actually went nose down with their tails above the water and just splashed as hard as they could those first 5 or 6 rows. And I thought that's a really good analogy for getting involved in the church. Stick with me. Because when you do things like VBS and you do things like Camp Nukawai or get involved in people's lives, they might ask you to baptize them and then you're gonna get wet. So when you have a front row seat to what God is doing, be prepared. Splash zone. You guys are sitting in it right now, just so you know. Yeah, that's good. The other thing that I really wanted to do when I was in Atlanta was visit Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park, which is a national park right in the city of Atlanta. It contains Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King was pastor, which is just a couple of blocks or about a block and a half from his birth home as well. I happened to be there on the anniversary of his assassination, and it was a striking and moving experience to just walk through the displays and the gardens and the different exhibits that they had about his life and his ministry. And I wish I would have had more time to be there. I wish I could have got in on a tour of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, but was unable to. There was lots that stood out to me, but because I was already studying for this series on Revelation, there's 3 things that stood out in particular. First of all, this is how the dragon, the beast, and Babylon respond to people or movements that get in their way. They destroy them. They have no patience for them. They want them out of the way. And we see that over and over again in the book of Revelation, and we see it over and over again through history. Secondly, Dr. King's rhetoric and movement reflected the messaging of the Old Testament prophets and the words of Revelation. And his commitment to nonviolence, to oppose Babylon, but not with the methods of Babylon, is a striking reflection of the way of Jesus and the call to Jesus' followers throughout the New Testament, but especially in the book of Revelation. The followers of the Lamb are called to victory not through violence, but through sacrifice. And finally, Dr. King's commitment was motivated by his vision. He referred to it often, most famously perhaps in his I Have a Dream speech in Washington. But Dr. King was not a naive optimist. He was aware of reality. At that speech, including in that speech, were these words: I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Echoes language from Revelation. Not only was he aware of the situation his followers came from, he was aware of the danger that he was wading into. See, Dr. King's dream was not rooted in unrealistic wishful thinking. His dream was rooted in a vision, something he saw. And in his last public speech the night before he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, Dr. King acknowledged the threats made against him. Like anybody, he said, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. If we could take all of Dr. King's speeches and writings and summarize them maybe in a few sentences or words, it might be something like this. Things might seem impossible. It might seem like nothing is ever going to change, like this is how things will always be. But let me tell you what I've seen. Things are not always as they seem. Jesus' message through John is the same. We learned last week, he knows. He walks amongst his churches and his community. He knows, I know what you're going through. I know how dark and difficult and painful it is. I know how hopeless it seems. It seems like things will never change. It seems like this is how it will always be. But let me show you what is really real. Look, things are not always as they seem. Look is the most frequent command in the book of Revelation. The second most frequent command is don't be afraid, and I think they're related. Because when we obey the first, when we look and see what Jesus wants us to see, then we can obey the second. We don't have to be afraid. This invitation to look occurs twice in the first two verses that we read in Revelation chapter 4. It's not as clear in the NLT translation, but in the original Greek, it would read something like verse 1, after this I looked, and look, a door standing open in heaven. In verse 2, and instantly I was in the Spirit, and look, a throne in heaven, and someone sitting on it. In our study of Revelation, we've already seen the reality behind our present reality and our experience. We've learned that the central conflict in our world is not between nations or political parties or ideologies. The central conflict is between the dragon and the lamb. And the dragon has lost to the lamb, and he's taking out his fury and frustration at his inability to overcome the lamb against God's work and God's people here on earth. And he's doing that by animating two powers, two beasts, the power of politics, the sea beast, and the power of propaganda, the land beast. And the manifestation of those powers in space and time is known as Babylon in the book of Revelation. And we learned that Babylons show up in every time. Every century has its Babylons, and Babylons show up in every space, every country, and as we learned last week, even churches reflect the values of Babylon. And we might wish that Jesus would immediately, after he reveals where Babylon has infiltrated the church, that he would immediately show John how Babylon will be defeated. And he will do that, but not until later. First, he invites us to look and see that there is a reality beyond what is apparently real. Things are not as they seem. Look, a door stands open in heaven. And there's two things to keep in mind as we hear this phrase. First of all, we need to understand that in John's worldview, heaven is not a future reality. We tend to think of heaven as a place we go someday after we die or when Jesus comes back. And so it might tempt us to think that this vision that John has is a vision of the future. It's not. It's a vision of what is really real right now in the midst of his present circumstances. Things are not as they seem. There's something even more real. Secondly, heaven is not so much another space as another dimension in John's worldview. This kind of is maybe best reflected in Celtic spirituality that talks about thin spaces, places where the barrier between the visible and the invisible world, or in Christian language, between earth and heaven is particularly thin. Many of you have experienced that, where you just sense the presence of God, or you sense that you're in a holy space. Jesus has opened a door for John to see what is real right behind or through what is apparently real. That ultimate reality is all around us, and it intersects what we see and feel as real. Right behind that, or intersecting through that, is the reality of heaven. Things are not as they seem. All you can see is chaos, darkness, destruction, pain. Look, a door standing open into heaven. Second, John sees a throne, verse 2. And instantly I was in the Spirit, and look, a throne in heaven. The throne is the most dominant image in the book of Revelation. We get fascinated by the dragon, the beasts, and 666. We get fixated on Armageddon. Jesus wants us to focus on the throne. It's referred to directly 47 times in the book, and indirectly another 77 times. I wonder if it might be the main point. There is a throne. Darrell Johnson writes, this means there's a supreme headquarters. There's a control center of the universe. There is a seat of authority and power. It might not always seem like it. It seems like things are random. It seems chaotic. It seems like nothing or no one is in charge and there's no purpose or point. But things are not as they seem. There is an ultimate reality behind our experience reality. Look, a door open into heaven. And there is a center of control. There's an order. There's a purpose. Look, a throne. And the throne is not empty. Again, verse 2. Instantly I was in the Spirit, and look, a throne in heaven, and someone sitting on it. And the one sitting on the throne was as brilliant as gemstones, like jasper and carnelian, and the glow of an emerald circled his throne like a rainbow. See, we're not waiting for someone to bring order from the chaos. God is on the throne. It might seem in our world like the dragon's coup was successful. It might seem like the beasts in Babylon have overrun and overpowered the world. Things are not as they seem. There is a throne, and God is on it. Our God reigns. And the throne is at the center of everything. It is center stage. It is the center of the cosmos. There's 24 elders representing God's redeemed people, the 12 sons of Israel, plus the 12 apostles representing Israel and the church, the complete story of God's salvation and redemption. They're around the throne. The throne is in the center. The 4 living creatures in chapter 4, verse 6 to 8, represent all of creation, the one that looks like a lion, the best of the wild animals. The one that looks like an ox, the best of the domesticated animals. The one that looks like an eagle, the best of the birds. And the one that looks like a human, the crowning glory of all creation. And 4 of them, which represents the 4 corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west, meaning that all of creation surrounds the throne. The throne is at the center. God is at the center of everything. There's so much imagery and so many design patterns packed into these verses. We don't have time to explore them all, but what stood out to me this week is the image of the sea. The sea is a design pattern or part of a design pattern that's supposed to remind us of the story of Exodus, where God redeemed his people from slavery in Egypt through the blood of a lamb and then rescued them from Egypt's army by parting the sea. He is in control of the water. The sea in ancient Near East culture and in John's worldview represents the forces of chaos and destruction that are always trying to undo the order in creation and in the cosmos. The sea in John's world is a source of fear, destruction, disorder. The first beast comes out of the sea. But in the heavenly reality, look at the sea, verse 6. In front of the throne was a shiny sea of glass, sparkling like crystal. Before the throne, the sea is stilled. Before the throne, the forces of disorder are brought into order. Before the throne, the forces of chaos and random chance are brought into purpose and meaning. It's heading in a direction. God is on the throne and the sea is still. And even better than that, in the New Jerusalem, chaos is not just subdued, it's conquered. Revelation 21, and there will be no sea, no more chaos, no more threat of disorder. But in our present reality, in our current reality, the sea is stilled. If Jesus stopped there, it might seem like he's diminishing or dismissing the suffering and pain in the world. Like, it doesn't really matter because it's only apparently real. What's really real is what really matters. Look, a door open into heaven. And it is helpful and true that not everything is out of control, even though it seems that way, that there is a throne and there is one who sits on the throne and God reigns over all of that. It is helpful to know that our lives are not just made up of random chance and chaos. But how does that help us in the midst of very real suffering? What about the reported 8,000 children in Gaza who've been killed in the war with Israel? What about the over 13,000 civilians, including over 700 children who have been killed in Ukraine since the start of Russia's invasion? What about the almost 17 million people displaced by conflict and violence in the Sudan and DRC? What about the millions displaced by disaster in Asia, or the thousands that are being displaced by wildfires in the prairie provinces? And that's just in the world. What about our own experience? What about the injustice that we suffer, or the slow move of justice in our justice system? What about the abuse that some of you have experienced, the illness that you carry, the chronic pain, the stress, the anxiety, the brokenness of relationships, the death of a loved one? Is Jesus saying that none of that matters because it's not really real? Look, a door. Look, a throne. Does that mean my suffering and my pain, confusion, darkness doesn't matter to Jesus? And if John's vision stopped there, it might seem like that, but things are not what they seem. And John's vision doesn't stop there. Chapter 5, verse 1. Then I saw a scroll in the right hand of the one who was sitting on the throne. There was writing on the inside and the outside of the scroll, and it was sealed with 7 seals. And here's what you need to know about the scroll. It's the plan. What's the purpose and meaning of all of this? It's in the scroll. Where is all of this headed? It's in the scroll. How's God going to undo all of the chaos and destruction in the world? How is God going to overcome all of this evil? How is God going to establish his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven? It's in the scroll. If things are not what they seem, then what are they? It's in the scroll. But there's a problem. Verse 2, and I saw a strong angel who shouted with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals on this scroll and open it?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll and read it. And John weeps. Maybe because it seems like he'll never know God's plan, the purpose of all of it. The purpose, remember, he's in exile on Patmos because of his faithfulness to Jesus. Is this going somewhere? Nobody can tell him. No one was found worthy to open the scroll and read what it says. And we need to understand that opening the scroll was not just about revealing the plan, but having the authority and power to execute God's plan. So it's not only that John will never know the plan, it feels like the plan itself is under threat. No one is worthy to open the scroll. But things are not what they seem. Verse 5. One of the 24 elders said to me, "Stop weeping. Look, there's that invitation again, right? Look, the lion, the lion of the tribe of Judah, the heir to David's throne, has won the victory. He is worthy to open the scroll and its 7 seals." This is the gospel in a sentence. There is someone who is worthy, not only of revealing God's plan, but executing God's plan. And the angel uses imagery drawn from the messianic expectations. The hero of God has arrived, and God's plan is no longer threatened. It will be seen through by the Lion of Judah, the heir to David's throne. It's strong militaristic images. It's kind of giving the impression like finally God's enemies are going to get it. Sets up John and his readers, including us maybe, to imagine military forces made up of heavily armed angels riding heavily muscled war horses, following a superhero out into battle. But things are not what they seem. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, verse 6, then I saw a lamb that looked as if it had been slaughtered. John hears, "Look, a lion." And he turns and he sees a lamb. And not just any lamb. In Greek, you can modify a word to make it a diminutive. So you can have a child, and by adding a suffix, you make it a little child. And that's exactly what John does here with the word lamb. It's not just a lamb, it's a little lamb. Dodge is ram tough, we get that, but like little lamb tough, that doesn't quite have the same ring, does it? But this is what John sees. And not just a little lamb, a lamb that has been slaughtered. And even before the scroll is open and the plan revealed, this tells us some things about who God is and what his plan is. It tells us that at the center of everything is the one who suffers. In the middle of the throne, in the middle of the throne, in the middle of the throne room, in the middle of all of creation is a lamb who has been slain. In the center of everything is the one who suffers. And this reminds us then that suffering is not meaningless and it's not just wiped away by the ultimate reality. Jesus in heaven still carries the scars of his suffering. The lamb looks like it's been slaughtered. As we sing sometimes, rich wounds yet visible above. And this tells us then that our suffering is not meaningless either. See, the reality of heaven doesn't mean that suffering isn't real. It just reminds us that there is something beyond our apparent reality that doesn't diminish our experience, but places it in the context of what else is really real. So John's message is not, you aren't really being persecuted. You aren't really facing pressure to accommodate and assimilate with Babylon. You're not really facing the consequences of sin. That's not real. That's not his message. His message is, that's not all that's real. The slaughtered lamb in the center of the throne reminds us that we are never alone in our suffering and our pain. In the center of suffering is the lamb who suffered. And as Darrell Johnson puts it, this means the closer we get to the heart of the lamb, the closer we get to a heart that aches for the suffering of the world. At the center of everything is one who suffers. It also tells us that at the center of everything is grace. Why was the lamb slaughtered? The elders tell us in their song, verse 9. They sang a new song with these words, chapter 5, verse 9. You are worthy to take the scroll and break its seals and open it, for you were slaughtered, and your blood has ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. In the Roman world where John lived, there were very few free people. Most people were owned. You belonged to your master, you belonged to Rome, and you couldn't just change that whenever you wanted. And the message of the New Testament and the message of Revelation is that when we as humans gave our allegiance to Babylon, we sold ourselves to the dragon, and he owns us. And now, because we are owned by him, we're tied to his destiny. And to become free in the Roman world, a slave could earn enough money through tips or whatever, and that was very rare. To buy their freedom. A slave might be granted freedom for longevity of service or doing a really good deed. A slave could, then again, that was very rare. A slave could be freed through a provision in the master's will so that when the master died, his slaves were freed. And that was somewhat common. But none of that happened for us. For us, the Lamb paid our ransom with his life so we could be free. And that's grace. It wasn't granted to us because of our faithfulness. It wasn't granted to us because of our longevity of service. It wasn't granted to us because of our ability or our resources or our potential. It was just given to us out of love. And that's grace. We receive it by declaring with our mouth and our lives that Jesus is Lord, just as we witnessed this morning. At the center of everything is the one who suffers. At the center of everything is grace, and at the center of everything is victory. The Lamb is already on the throne. It's not a vision of the future. It's a vision of what is really real right now. The Lamb holds the purpose and plan of creation in his hand. He takes the scroll from the one on the throne. And the Lamb is worthy to reveal and implement that plan, which means that we don't need to work for victory, we work from victory. And we work from victory in the way of the Lamb. John expects to see a lion and turns and sees a lamb. And Richard Bauckham says that the shock of this reversal discloses the central mystery of the apocalypse. This is the ultimate revelation of Revelation. God overcomes the world not through a show of force, but through the suffering and death of Jesus. He wins as the slaughtered lamb by entering into and taking on himself all of the suffering and pain in your life and the world. And he reigns as the slaughtered lamb by entering into and taking on himself all the suffering and pain and darkness in your life and in the world. And he calls us then to reign with him in the same way as lambs. One of the questions that somebody sent in is, what does the victorious life look like? I'm summarizing it a little bit, but what does the victorious life look like? And Revelation tells us the victorious life looks like the lamb who was slain. And we as his followers then follow his way. It looks like the words of Jesus when he calls us to deny self, take up the cross, and follow him. That's the victorious life. You see, we reign not as a military force, but as priests. Look at verse 10, chapter 5, verse 10. It's part of the Song of the Elders. And you have caused them, those you have redeemed from every tribe and language, people and nation, you have caused them to become a kingdom of priests for our God, and they will reign on the earth. We reign as priests. Priests represent the people to God, and they represent God to the people. So as priests, we reign as those who enter into the suffering, brokenness, and darkness of our world, ministering the presence of the Lamb who was slain. And we reign as priests who stand with those who suffer, with those who are oppressed and those who rebel, pleading for the just mercy of God on their behalf. And it seems like a weak and foolish way to reign, but things are not as they seem. Look at the description of the Lamb. Verse 6, then I saw a lamb that looked as if it had been slaughtered, but it was now standing between the throne and the 4 living beings and among the 24 elders. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which represent the 7-fold Spirit of God that is sent into every part of the earth. The Lamb has 7 eyes. 7 is the symbol for completion based on the creation narrative and the Sabbath rhythms. Divine completion, indicating that the Lamb is completely wise and his way is completely wise. The Lamb has 7 horns, indicating that he has perfect power. It is not weak and foolish. It is wise and powerful. He just redefines the nature of power. The power in God's kingdom is not about muscles or politics, economics, status, or military. It's lamb power. And it takes 2 forms in the book of Revelation. It takes the form of the spoken word symbolized by the sword coming from Jesus' mouth in Revelation 1 and Revelation 20. And it takes the form of the power of his death, symbolized by the slaughtered lamb. It's the slaughtered lamb that we follow, and it's the slaughtered lamb that we worship. And he's given us a way to remember this redefinition of the nature of power and to be formed by it as we reflect on it. He's given us communion. And so we're going to come to the table this morning. I'm going to invite the worship team to come and the servers to prepare to serve. And we're going to celebrate communion together as we close our service today. In communion, we reenact in a simple way Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples, where he took bread and broke it and said, "This is my body broken for you." And then he took the cup and blessed it and shared it with them and said, "This represents the blood of the new covenant, the new relationship that we have with God." In communion, we remember that we are participants in the ultimate Exodus story, where he has freed us from slavery to sin and death by the blood of the perfect Lamb. If you are a follower of Jesus, we invite you to participate fully with us, even if this is your first time at our church or you're visiting with us. This is the Lord's table, and we are all God's family. If you've confessed Jesus is Lord, then you are part of us, and so we invite you to participate with us. If maybe this is your first act of declaring Jesus as Lord, then please also don't hesitate. Participate fully. If you are not yet ready, that's okay. Just let the elements pass you by. Nobody will hardly even notice, let alone judge, so just let it go. Our practice here is we will sing a couple songs while the servers distribute the bread, and then followed immediately by the cup. We will hold on to those, and then we will eat and drink all together to symbolize and demonstrate the unity that we have in God's family because of Jesus. If you need a gluten-free option, that is also available. If you didn't grab it on the way in, just indicate to Terry there. He's got it at the back. Just stick your hand up and he'll make sure that you get that as well. Let me pray as we prepare our hearts to come to the table. Then the worship team will lead us again in a couple of songs. We'll remain seated while the elements are passed, and then I'll come up and lead us in eating together. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, would you give us eyes to see what John saw? Would you remind us as we take bread and drink the cup that we have a God who does not dismiss or diminish our suffering or the reality of our pain or darkness, but enters right into it to vanquish it. And at the center of everything is a lamb who was slain. And so we come with our joys, with our triumphs. We come with our sadness, our disappointment, our grief, our brokenness. And we come to join you at your table and to receive again your grace and your mercy. Meet us here, please, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Servers, would you come and serve?